Hello and welcome to Find the Helpers. I am your host, Brad Bogus, and I'm joined here by my co-host, Christian Campbell.
Hello, and I'm Christian Campbell, and I am here with the Helpers Pod, and I'm joined also. We got Vince Chandler with us today, and he's going to be guesting for us, and then we'll have a guest later on. We've with Nebraskans for Peace to discuss the global hunger strike and solidarity with Palestine. But for today, it's the three core team.
You can find us on YouTube and streaming on your favorite podcast app. Our clips are always available on your favorite social media scroll too. So whether that's TikTok or Reels, you can help us reach further by following us everywhere and sharing your favorite moments with those friends and family members that you think most need to hear us. Confused and overwhelmed brothers, or that still MAGA uncle who is starting to show some regrets.
All right, everyone. We'll be joined later in the show by Nebraskans for Peace to discuss the global hunger strike and solidarity with Palestine. Today, in the guest seat, we're joined by our friend and show producer, Vince Chandler, they, them. Vince is a multimedia journalist with 20 years of professional storytelling experience. They've worked for outlets like the Denver Post, have made a feature-length documentary called Running with My Girls, has been a political speechwriter and communications expert, and they are now currently driving around the Heartland, writing a magazine series for Yellow Scene called These American Crossroads. Welcome to Find the Helpers, Vince.
Thank you guys so
Yay.
much for having me on. Yeah, we need canned studio audience, right? For sure.
And this is the thing that I hope listeners, viewers take away from what we're trying to do here. Christian and I in particular, we're just guys. Like, we're not journalists. We don't work in the media. We don't work in the government. We're probably a lot like many of you whom find themselves really distraught with what's happening in the world, what's happening in our countries, and seeing the slide towards fascism. We feel restless, like we need to do something, but many of us are probably raising children and don't necessarily want to join a militia. And so we're trying to figure out what we can do to help, right? That's what the whole podcast is about. So we're going to cover some stories on what's happening internationally and domestically. We're going to be talking to guests that are out there actually doing work and finding different ways to resist fascism. And we'll talk about that historically with professors coming up in the coming weeks. We'll talk about that with organizers, people who are currently organizing or have successfully organized in the past, and find ways that we can maybe help usher ourselves, as well as you along with us, into some action to help resist fascism in a way that, doesn't necessarily require us to take up arms.
We don't want to get there, and that's what this podcast is about, is like, how can we not get to violence?
That would be great. Yeah.
Wouldn't that be
Yeah.
great? Wouldn't it be great if we could actually work this out? I mean, this was kind of also inspired because, when Brad and I first met, we talked, we just yammered and sort of got aligned in terms of our worldviews and whatnot, and just respect for that. But he told me about Vince and what Vince was up to, and that he was traveling around through the Heartland, and that he had been meeting a lot of, and this is in early parts of the Trump admin, and he was meeting a lot of people who were the sort of the hope in the middle of all the darkness in the Heartland, those little bright lights that are twinkling, trying to form some sort of resistance. And what Vince was finding is that you had a lot of absolutely just devastated people who didn't know what to do. They were just had the wind knocked out of them. We all had the wind knocked out of them. And that to me just what spoke to me, because that's what I felt as well. I'm usually a person of action, or at least I can handle and put historical events in perspective and see them in the long sort of arc of history. But this to me feels so unique, the time that not only the United States but the world is facing right now, and so many of us just feel absolutely disheartened by it and immobilized by it. And so I think what I'm curious about is finding out who are those people out there who are doing the helping. They're doing the actions. They've been doing it for a long time. You don't have to learn everything yourself. Go to the people who are helping already and find out how they're doing it, and listen and learn, and then get inspired by them, because you realize that it doesn't have to be huge things you can do. It can be the smallest little things, but cumulatively those things matter. And so for me, I'm really looking forward to this podcast in terms of just the people that we're going to get to meet, and my own learning process in this, and how in my small ways I'm a father. I got a 6-year-old daughter. I want to know how to create a dragon slayer in a time of dragons out of my daughter and out of my family. And I want to go and meet all those dragon slayers out there and get information so that I can bestow that on my family, but also equip my community with perhaps ideas that we can take action.
So we are going to cover some stories that are happening internationally and domestically. And I want you to know that, like, in the doing of this, we're not trying to convey here's the doom and gloom and the outrage we should all be feeling. We're always trying to find the angle on what we can do to make some actual change, what we can do to help. Um, the first story we're going to start out with is an international story that is so heavy, to be perfectly honest, it feels futile, hopeless. It feels really hard to take in. But that's what's happening in Gaza right now. And it's the forced famine that is really currently happening, along with all of the other atrocities that are being committed upon the people there. There was a really interesting international outcry that just came out to raise awareness to the starvation and famine problem that Bisan Oda, a journalist, called for. That was called Bang the Pots. And the idea was to get as many people out in the streets with empty pots to represent the empty pots of Palestine, and to bang them as loudly as possible for 2 hours during rush hour to generate the most amount of sound and awareness to what is happening in Gaza. And what's interesting about this is very different than like a typical protest, right? There wasn't like major marches. There wasn't an attempt to disrupt the flow of traffic and commerce, right? This was even more just, singular in a place, make some noise, right? Make sure that where you are in a high traffic area, that people can't ignore you. And what was really interesting about the one that happened in Denver that Vince reported on was that there were actually two spots where these Bang the Pots protests happened. One right at the steps of the Capitol, amongst one of the most busy thoroughfares in downtown Denver. The other in front of Senator Michael Bennett's office. And Senator Bennett, his office decided to barricade their office with plywood walls all around their office to protect him from the banging of pots. And I just found this story fascinating. Obviously, like we're starting to become aware of this problem that is just a cascading list of problems that are all stemming from the genocide happening in Palestine. And I address that very directly as genocide as a Jew. I feel like it's important to say because so many of the people in my community do not recognize what the rest of the world has recognized there. And then we have this like awareness created by this journalist that is just banging pots, but seems to have already gotten the attention even of Trump himself, who recently made some statements in the last 2 days about this is a problem that needs to be fixed. We need to get aid to those people. And I just found that pretty fascinating, right? Like that's a unexpected, I wouldn't call him ally, but an unexpected voice for support towards ending what is absolutely going to be declared a famine. Recent story said 1 in 5 people are in catastrophic hunger conditions in Palestine. Were you able to see any of those protests up in Canada? Did that make it up there, Christian?
I lived in the United States for 30 years. Moved to the U.S. in 1995, and but June 25th of this year, my wife and I decided we were visiting family up here. We were at the family cottage, and we just her my wife is name her name is America, by the way. I married America, so you should all know that. My name is
That's true.
Christian, so together we're the Republican wet dream. We're Christian America. But Christian America have got up and we've gone to Canada. We're both Canadian, and because we are feeling that this is a time we have the possibility to do it. It's taken us a long time to do this because we love our community so much back in the United States. That's how great Beacon, New York. That's where we were living. Beacon, New York is, and I loved our people, and I love their feistiness and their creativity, and I love America. I've lived in the United States longer than I've lived in Canada. I am an American citizen. I became an American citizen in 2008. But I gotta say, my wife and I have been talking about this for years. The switch just flipped, and June 25th, 2025, this year, we made the decision, and 25 days later, we moved into our new house up in Canada. That's how quickly my wife and I will work on things. And by that, by my wife and I mean my wife, Capricorn Queen. She gets shit done. And so we're up here now. So I'm just acclimating to Canada right now. I don't see this as a retreat. I see this as a strategic repositioning. It's the
Yeah.
safety of my daughter. It's the safety of my wife. It's also for our mental state. And I feel as I want to be as vocal as possible. And I feel like the safest place I can do that is up in Canada. And so I can add support to brothers and sisters down stateside and around the world. So
Yeah.
Canada seems to be the place. Canada is very vocal about these things, but it's got its own complicity to deal with when it comes to what's happening in Israel. It has remained silent for a while, for far too long, and it is now becoming politically expedient for people to turn towards suddenly recognizing the genocide that's been happening for 2 years. I've been talking about it as a genocide for 2 years. This has been evident to me. I was producing a show at the time, and it was very difficult for me to have to go and talk about this because, suddenly people might turn on your show, and I've got actors to pay and production audiences to come.
Yeah.
So I was dealing with that struggle. But I feel like I'm in a country right now where there are more adults in the room when it comes to leadership, and so that is
Certainly.
where I am for now, and yeah, because these are uncertain times.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
was unable to join the protests in Denver, but Vince, you were down there. You reported on them for Yellow Scene. So what was your take on this and your experience in, doing this in Denver?
One of the most notable things that I talked about in my live thread on Blue Sky, and I think I even mentioned it in my article for the magazine, was just the number of parents that were there. We're all parents, and we're all very empathetic of imagining our children in the shoes of a Palestinian in the occupied territories right now. And while we need to have empathy for the adults as well, it's just so easy to think how can this suffering be impacted onto a child. And something that I haven't really seen, especially since the Aurora Police Department violently swept a violent vigil full of families during the Elijah McClain uprising in 2021,
Yeah.
has been parents bringing small children to these direct actions for Palestine. I've seen them at 50-51 actions where it's much
Yeah.
more broad, much more big tent. Nobody really knows what the takeaway is other than we're angry. Um,
Right. The No
we've
Kings
seen a lot more
protest.
police. Yeah, yeah, or the
Yeah.
ice out, or there's an upcoming Rage Against the Regime. I'll be in Topeka, Kansas for the Rage Against the Regime actions. Follow my coverage in Yellow Sea magazine for more. But those generally have families with kids at them, while these more militant anti or pro-Palestinian liberation actions tend to be middle-aged people solo, or in
Yeah.
groups. And at this action, there were a lot of mothers with small children, representing a very diverse blanket of nationalities and ethnic backgrounds. I talked to people who were immigrants from the Middle East, as well as a lot of Latino parents, some white parents, a few Black parents, and like they were
Incredible.
bringing their kids out because they were seeing their kids in the shoes of these Palestinian children who are being starved to death right now by the Netanyahu regime in Israel. Um,
Yeah.
and uh, and that gives me a pause because it's new. Police don't tend
Yeah.
to come in on white women with their children present. And also white women with their children present have an outsized voice in the United States. They are a
Yeah.
group that tends to be listened to, and so seeing them show up for the first time was really notable to me in this one, and it was definitely right in line with what Bisanoda was calling for when she asked for people to bang the pots, and I hope it continues. I know that the Rage Against the Regime action taking place this weekend across the country in coordination with 50-51. They've also asked for people to bring pots out and bang them. I don't know if they're paying the right homage to the original call and why people were
Right.
asked to be doing that. But I can say after being in that crowd for several hours, it is loud, it is obnoxious, and it's a great way to get attention for sure.
The other thing that I think is interesting about protests is you always get people who are like, you're wasting your time. This isn't going to change anything, right? You're a drop in the sea. But when you have protests like that, where you have a diverse set of families banging pots loudly in the front of the Capitol steps, like you're literally sending a signal to the people who determine policy at that state house. And they are affected by that. You know, there have been politicians who have switched this. Like Christian just said, it's become politically expedient to become a outspoken critic of Israel's genocide against Palestine. That's a wild shift from where we were when it started, right? When it started, if you even said those words, you were accused of anti-Semitism. Even me, a Jew, constantly accused by other Jews of being an anti-Semite, which is wild to me. But you know,
Try saying that shit when your name is Christian.
exactly. It's one of the reasons why I constantly qualify that I'm Jewish when I say these things. Jewish Voices for Peace is an incredible organization for other Jews who may feel similar to me that you can check out and get engaged in. I learned about them at the No Kings protest, and have recently been defending them against blatant propaganda and lies that people say that they are funded by Hamas, which is like the go-to discredit response to just about any organization that is collecting anyone, including Jews, to speak out against what is happening. It's really quiet, wild. But this pot banging protest is great because, like, this is where anybody can participate, relatively free of concern, and make an impact, and you can change the way lawmakers think. So I think this was a really smart way to draw engagement out to this, in a way that more people could, I think, relate to.
And we definitely need to remember that people are listening, and it can feel kind of like an uphill battle for sure. But in the days after the Bang the Pots action went off around the world, and Bisan on her Instagram story with 4.1 million followers on it, shared posts, including mine, from all around the world, and it was easy to see how engaged this planet was in it. France over the weekend formally recognized Palestine as a nation,
As
and
did Canada.
they're yeah, and
Yeah.
can't, they're the first of many. And as that happens, it's going to increase pressure on Netanyahu's government to start making some ethical choices, or hopefully dissolve and be replaced by a better administration. But even Netanyahu was forced to allow some version of aid in. It's airdrops, which are not particularly what people are looking for. They're radically dangerous, even more dangerous than American guarded aid distribution centers, where Americans are using American bullets to shoot at Palestinians, and by some reports kill as many as 1,000 of them. Airdrops are still considered more dangerous, but Netanyahu allowed these because of the global pressure, and he wants to be seen as responding positively to the requests of the people. We need to recognize the propaganda, listen to the experts on the ground, know that no, this doesn't solve it, but it does prove that they're listening and that they're seeing the outrage, and so the outrage needs to continue.
It happens slow and then it happens fast. That's generally how all events in history go. And so
Yeah.
it's been painfully slow. Many of us have watched it in the fact that we're talking about famine right now, and can't even remember just recently it was bombs and burning to death and crushed to death and suffocated and under rubble, was the other way that they were decimating
Yeah.
the Palestinian people. And we've already put that out of mind for now until all this is over and the history books are written. But we also have to keep in mind that this has been a constant thing for 2 years, and that the images that we saw of people burning alive wasn't enough to
Yeah.
get this to turn. And it's something that I don't know if other listeners feel this, but just such a disappointment. I'm used to being disappointed in myself more than others most of the time. You're right. I'm not,
The actor's curse.
yeah, right. The actor's curse or whatever. But just the disappointment in our systems,
Yeah.
in our media, and in kind people, nice people they were all nice people. And now I'm just seeing them acting in very disappointing ways. And the fact that the propaganda worked, it worked
Yeah.
really well. And we're now unwinding painfully from this propaganda, from decades of propaganda. Propaganda that I, at one point in my life, was believed. I
Yeah.
raised in Canada, but my first love of my life She was Israeli. We were together for 6 years. We were engaged to be married. She wanted to be married in Israel. So if you want to be married in Israel, got to be Jewish. So I actually went to Hollywood Shul to study to be a Jew for a year.
Yeah.
And I had all these stories. I had the Zionist stories in my head, and believed them. It was a desert, and then it was beautiful. That's what
Right.
they came along. That's what happened, right? And the unwinding of that is painful. It's painful, and that's what we're seeing right now. Is I think the painful sort of the unwashing of people's brains, and it's violent, and it's uncomfortable, it's emotional, and it also is revealing.
So happy to be joined today by Caitlin from Nebraskans for Palestine, which is a grassroots organization, advocacy using nonviolence, political pressure, community education, and cultural preservation to advance the liberation of Palestine from the Heartland. Caitlin Finn is a Nebraska organizer with experience organizing in the criminal justice and prison advocacy field and has been directly involved with NFP since October 2023. So, Caitlin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We were just talking about the story of the famine in Palestine, of the Bang the Pots protest, and sort of the recent shift in political opinion globally as it relates to the famine in particular. We know the flotilla has been attacked and that the people on it have been arrested. And I would love to hear just like how Nebraskans for Palestine is raising awareness and engaging people in action from the Heartland to help support people in Palestine. And we'd also love to know what other listeners and viewers of this show may be able to do to help, and I just want to qualify that with like the thing feels so enormous and so atrocious that it's almost like it feels hopeless from the outside to be able to help. I think a lot of people feel that way. Like, if I donate money to aid, is that aid even going to end up in the hands of Palestinians? Like, how can I actually do anything here? So, would love to hear your takes on this and what you guys are doing in Nebraska.
Yes, thank you for this question. I think that all acts, small or large, are important. And I think us in the Midwest, especially in primarily red states, we feel that very intensely. This idea of anything that we do is not going to make a difference, but that is simply untrue.
Yeah.
Everything that we do, even if it doesn't have a political turning point, is reaching people on the ground in Palestine, in Gaza, and giving them pieces of hope and letting them know that people are there fighting for them, and that we won't let them do this alone,
Yeah.
and that we're going to do everything that we can to stop it. So Nebraskans for Palestine hosts regular public actions via protests, community education events, ways that people can apply political pressure to our elected officials, which are primarily Republican. Right now, we have activated a hunger strike out of Omaha, Nebraska. That strike right now is comprised of 19 participants, myself included, and is being participated in various ways. So some people are doing full abstention from food and consuming only water. Some people are only consuming diets that mimic the caloric intake of people in Gaza, so anywhere between 250 and then on the high end, 1,000 calories. Most people
Mm.
staying around the 500 who are participating in that way. And we're doing this for public awareness. We're also doing this as a fundraising effort. So we have a fundraising goal of $10,000 for community kitchens and mutual aid organizations in Gaza that we know are still operating in some capacity, and that information is backed by the Humanity Project, who recently put out a report of who's still operating. So
Yeah.
that is what we're doing right now. And the most immediate way that people can get involved is donations. If people are local, we're also asking for political pressure and asking our local representatives to co-sponsor HR 3565, the Block the Bombs Act. When one of those two is met, either the co-sponsorship from our Republican representatives, congressional representatives, or we meet our $10,000 fundraising goal, that is when we will break the strike as it is right now and regroup.
That's amazing. Do you find that, engaging in a hunger strike just generates more awareness than other forms of action? Is it is it particularly useful at generating, say, enough headline and journalism attention to be able to drive forward the pressure that you need for a Republican lawmaker to choose to do something like this?
Hmm. That's interesting. I think time will tell, and we'll see
Yeah.
how the rest of the week goes. Of course, it's much harder to ignore a loud public action like a protest or a march that we are engaging in versus something that's more easy to be ignored. Um, I was chatting with one of the other strikers this morning about the way in which it's almost this strange layer to the experience of participating in a strike of the people that I'm working alongside or engaging with in my day-to-day life who maybe haven't shown up in really radical ways or who haven't directly participated in the liberation of Palestine or who haven't paid attention. It almost feels now when you do go on a strike and you feel internally this very acute um, sensation and multiple sensations. And it is an emotional experience. And that is something that you feel and is connected to the people that you're advocating for. And it is not felt by the person that's sitting across from you, right? It's not felt by the people that are in the grocery store that you're at work with. Your children and family. And so it does feel like something that is easy to ignore. And our goal is to make it unavoidable. So we're participating in daily meetups outside of our mayoral office and city council office in the mornings, and our local congressional representative, Don Bacon's office in the afternoons.
Are you finding other cities that are doing this hunger strike in solidarity with you? And the follow-up question I have to that is, like, you're facing an uphill battle, right? You're trying to flip Republican lawmakers to support a bill that will, make some major changes that seem off platform for them, right? We just saw recently Trump make some statements even that something needs to be done about the famine in Palestine. So what do you think is happening here with the sentiment on the Republican lawmaker side? And, like, have you seen a shift in locally in Nebraska or on the tail end of Trump's statement? Like, sometimes he tends to wag the dog a bit when it comes to what the Republicans say and do. So are you seeing a shift there in how Republicans are starting to engage with the story? And if so, where do you attribute that?
Not yet. And I don't know that we will.
Yeah.
And organizing within the Heartland and within red states is vastly different than organizing in blue states and more progressive places. And that doesn't mean that we shouldn't continue to apply that pressure and take. We had the majority of our state senators 2 years in a row sign a public resolution in support of Israel. I think there were 12 of our 49 state senators who abstained from signing
Yeah.
that. We expect them to do that again this October. Um, our congressional representative here out of Omaha just last week publicly, when confronted, said, "I love Israel," with a smirk on his face. We don't think that there's going to be this huge shift. However, we do see the shift in the public narrative here in Omaha. Um, and the reality is people move out of those positions.
Yeah.
And we have to keep Palestine on the mouths of politicians in Nebraska because those seats come up for reelection all the time. For example, the person that we are asking to co-sponsor this Lock the Bombs Act is retiring, and there's multiple people who have put their hat in for his seat in the 2026 election. And so part of this pressure is also to make sure that they remember that this is an issue that Nebraskans care about.
I want to kind of circle back on something you were saying about the difficulty of organizing in a red state as opposed to a blue state. And for all of our two listeners out there, we just started this. I mean, what are we talking about? I've been a blue state person all my life. I now live in I'm back in Canada, originally Canadian. But what is that? What do you think that experience is for a lot of people who are in red states who want to organize? What are your key frustrations?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think the key frustrations are a lot of things. Mostly it's lacking the numbers in participation, both within the progressive spaces and the ones that are more conservative. And for some context, Nebraska is a red state. We have two big cities, Omaha, and then our capital, Lincoln. Omaha nationally is considered the blue
Yeah.
Democratic city in the whole state of Nebraska, and the rest of it is rural. It's mostly agriculture, farmlands, and very conservative values. So in that regard alone, it is challenging to uplift a progressive, right, message in a sea of red with people who, number one, don't want to hear it, and number two, feel entitled to a verbal violence in suppressing that message, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So there's that, and with that then comes the fear of activation, the fear of engagement, meaning people who do share your values have a harder time stepping into those spaces of action. So it means we have smaller protests than you would see in other blue cities and blue states. It means that we have a much more difficult time trying to pass any sort of resolutions from a city level or state level or any sort of BDS legislature, things like that. So on multiple fronts, it is just more challenging to step into those spaces, I think.
How do people find one another? Let's put it that way. Is it on social media? Is that how you sort of gather your numbers as best you can?
It is mostly on social media, um, which we have a pretty decent organic following. And then the other way is being consistent uh, in our public appearance. So we have a bi-weekly every other Wednesday. For the first year, it was every Wednesday protest that happens at a really public intersection, and people expect us to be there. They're used to seeing us there. And then we also host weekend marches in another very popular part of town as well, in addition to trying to put stickers all over town and signs up where we can,
Yeah.
and compiling supportive lists of supportive businesses who are coming around us. So a lot of it is on social media, and a lot of it is just boots on the ground in our community.
It's a hard struggle doing this work in a red state. I come from Texas, so I can empathize a bit, even though Texas did have a sort of blue history at some point, and everyone talks about it flipping blue someday, as if that's going to happen soon. Maybe it will, but you feel like the people who are really organizing in these states are in the struggle because it takes a different kind of makeup. It's more term, I think, less fair weather, right, to be able to actually get some change there. So, Caitlin, thank you so much for joining us. I know you mentioned earlier one of the ways people can help, which was to donate funds to Nebraskans for Palestine. How can they do that? Where can they find you? And are there any other places that you would suggest they look to get active, whether they're in Nebraska or just want to support?
People can also text Gaza is starving with no spaces to 44321. That will also get them to the donation page. And then as far as involvement, people can follow us on social media at Nebraskans for Palestine on Instagram and TikTok. And then getting involved offline, if you see us, just please stop. Just stop, say hello. And if you're not in Nebraska, to be honest, there are a lot more organizers in red states than you would think. So there's a couple of organizations in our neighbor, Iowa. There's a small group in South Dakota, and then down south in Missouri and Kansas. So Google your state plus Palestine and see what comes up.
Fantastic. Caitlin, great information. Thank you so much. Good luck on the hunger strike. Good luck on the bill. We'll be rooting for you from here, and we'll make sure to drop all the links so people can find you guys and support along the way.
Excellent. Thank you all so much, and I will talk with you later.
All right. Well, for our next thing, we're going to stay in Omaha. We're going to stay in a red state, and we've got the helper highlight for today. We're going to be speaking or talking about Christian Cafe Church preaches Mary calls for direct action. I don't know much about this actually, so I'm really curious to be enlightened. What's going on here?
I'm definitely happy to shed a little bit more context on this really cool story that I found when I was out in Nebraska last week, doing research and meeting with people, including Jewish Voices for Peace and Nebraskans for Peace in Palestine. I was crawling around Omaha talking to people who identified as liberal, as left, as anything but terrified by the current federal administration. And while I was walking through Omaha's old market, I stumbled upon a church, the Urban Abbey, which is set up as a coffee house and bookshop. And to be honest, I needed my phone charged, so I popped into it to ask if they had a phone charger I could borrow, and ended up browsing the selection of the books, and a lot of them looked like things that I had on my shelves at home. There was a lot of socialist texts. There was the People's History of the United States, and then there was an entire wall set up for the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. When Christianity left North Africa, it had gospels and books written by dozens, even hundreds of people. And then when it was returned from Europe back to the rest of the world, suddenly we had the King James edition, which included the gospels that we're all familiar with and excluded a lot of them, including the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. Over the last few years, a lot of feminists and people who preach women's rights are inside of the church are bringing back and resurrecting the Gospel of Mary. It's when you read it, it's pretty obvious why church leaders in a male-centric gospel or a male-centric gaze decided to exclude it, because it really highlighted what dummies the disciples really were, how they regularly misunderstood the teachings of Christ, and Mary was his closest confidant by all accounts, and she really kind of was like, these boys don't get it. This is what he was saying, and when you read through it, it's so real, homie. And so I was so interested in the fact that all these books were out, and they invited me back to their Sunday morning church services, which are designed to use faith to spur direct civil and community action. And so of course I was going to go to this, and to their credit, they really tied in the Gospel of Mary into this is what Christ meant. When he said uplift everybody, when he flipped tables in the marketplace, when he said that it would be easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God, was that we really do need to uplift everybody. And it's, these days it's a little bit more socialism than people want to admit Jesus was teaching. But they built their entire service around the gospel, and then taking what you were feeling inside your heart a little bit of maybe some defeat, maybe some frustration, and offering the channels to be able to immediately impact not just Omaha but Nebraska and then the country, because we are a local to state to federal uh, uh, structure here in the United States. Few things start as national,
Yeah.
and so they're teaching the kids in the congregation how to attend public meetings. They have budget overwatch conversations and work groups where people come together and talk about the city and the state budgets, and they bring people from Omaha to Lincoln to testify at the state house. They organize protests. They march in the annual Omaha Pride Parade, which takes place in July in Nebraska, not in June. And they also they do things like host drag queen story hours. They platform trans voices in the community, and they faced, it's not without repercussions. They faced threats of fire bombs and violence in the very recent past. It reads like something from the first civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s, but it was a year ago, even more
Yeah.
contemporary. And it was really cool to challenge my own assumption, especially about America's Heartland, which is one of the things I'm trying to do with these American Crossroads, is challenge some of my own assumptions about what's going on in the Middle States. And the
Sure.
idea that all of Christianity is this evangelical fundamentalism that is rooted in like Liberty University style ripping of rights
Yeah.
and very conservative politics, but that's just not the case in this particular church. They believe in their Christianity, they believe in the teachings of the Bible, and they believe that all of that means that everybody should be treated pretty okay.
So like as a Jewish atheist myself, right? I am highly skeptical of anything that feels like a front organization for a church. You know what I mean? Like, I remember there being a big row in Denver, in fact, that there was a coffee shop that was just a masquerade for a church and used it as a way to proselytize and convert people to Christianity. And as a Jew growing up in Texas, the entire pressure religiously was always to try to convert me because I was a heretic and I was going to burn in hell. I was told that regularly in school. So like, just to throw some pushback out there and then have you correct me. The pushback for these types of things is like what, like, it feels like, two different things trying to funnel me into something, right? And if I don't either already relate to Christianity or use Christianity as my pathway to activism, it kind of feels like that's not my place. That's not, either they're not going to welcome it or they're there really just to try to convert me to Christianity. So set me straight on this.
I'm also not a
Yeah.
Christian person, but I was raised around a lot of religion and encouraged to spend a lot of time as a kid in multiple religious institutions. Um, Across many faiths, and Christianity is one that I struggle the most with because it's such a big tent, because there's so many denominations, because people are constantly splitting off and making their own churches. That was kind of what I held in my heart while I started to talk to the reverends and the staff at this space. Like, what are you really trying to do here? Like, you're not making it a
Yeah.
secret that you're an incognito church. Like, you purposely set up your space so that people would wander in, and it might take them a little while before they realized where they were or that they were being proselytized to.
Yeah. Feels
And
subversive,
that's
right?
on purpose. Yeah, and it's admittingly on purpose. They say so on their website even. Like where we want to kind of trick people into accidentally being in church, and we don't want you to feel like you're in church. And we see this used for nefarious purposes like Drip Coffee in Denver, Colorado. Um, but there's also the other side of it where if they aren't deploying the same tactics, it's a master's tools argument. If they aren't deploying the same tactics, then we're letting people with an evil agenda operate inside of a vacuum. And anybody who's looking for a church will stumble into one. It might fall down a hateful rhetoric instead of falling down a loving one. I
Yeah.
talked to a woman at the Urban Abbey who had been attending services there for more than 2 years, and she had her mind changed on trans rights. She was like, I was pro-gay, but like the trans thing seemed like too much. And then a
Yeah.
couple of years later, not because she was having it shoved down her throat or was even being presented with constant literature, but she was just existing in a room where trans people existed too. And it just happened
Imagine
to be a
that.
space that felt safe for her, a church. She wound up there her very first service because she had just moved to Old Market in Omaha and Googled church closest to me. And that was the one. So she went into there, and now two
Yeah.
years later, she lives more than 30 minutes away and drives past different sanctuaries and different chapels to make it back here every Sunday. When she's on the road, she watches their live stream. And she found her new church because she found a space that was loving and accepting and felt right for her. And not only that, she had had personal growth as a result of it. And so, um,
Yeah.
does does faith necessarily mean that you are of a certain mindset? No. And if
Right.
there are not faith centers set up to be able to catch people of our mindset on the left, where does that really lead? It either leaves Christian, not you, Christians to have an absolute crisis of faith and fall apart. And for a lot of people, their gods are what hold their id together. And so a crisis of faith can create a much bigger conundrum in their heart, other than I'm an atheist now. Um, it leaves them
Yeah.
either they're going to fall apart or they need that soft place to catch them. And so as a journalist, I was very interested in how they were setting up this soft space, but also standing 10 toes forward, chest out, on their principles, and being unabashed about it, which to their credit, they are also doing that. They're like, yeah, we're a church, but like, and they're not even like, we're the cool church. They're the kind church. And
Yeah.
they're not just saying that, they're proving it by accepting every single human being who walks through the door, even the person presenting as a man who obviously hasn't showered in a couple of weeks, and you know your nose crinkles up a little bit, but you make space for him to join the table.
Yep. I think it's religion is a technology, and going back to the master's tool thing, if it's a technology that works, it works really well if you want to organize people, if you want to have some sort of mono story narrative for your culture, for your people. It's easier to organize, and then it's easier. You can use religion in times of duress politically. You can use religion as a way to talk about the higher ideas of what it is about being alive. And those things get lost in all the minutia of politics and the
Yeah.
corruption and everything like that. And religion serves as a narrative structure to remind ourselves that there's more to it than all of this. And what are we all about? Who are we? And I'm an atheist as well. I guess I'm an atheist. I was baptized a Catholic, but very rarely in every church. Parents were both European Catholics who basically, left after they got divorced. Of course, they're out of the Catholic Church. And by grade four, I was arguing with my dad against the existence of God. I was like, this is crap, because I was seeing a lot of evangelical tendencies in some of my family, my sort of more distant family. I was seeing what it was kind of doing to them and with their
Yeah.
judgment. I saw them as judgmental. They weren't
That's right.
what they were doing, what they were practicing to me as a fourth grader was not kind. And so that sort of took me out of any kind of church, and I'm fine with that. But I do envy people who do have that, and I do envy those who use the technology, although for nefarious matters. The Republicans or the right or the fascists are using religion left, right, and center for their own means, and they're completely bastardizing the essential teachings of the faith, which is basically take care of one another and don't let the powerful punch down on the weak. That's it. That's it. And so I think we have to reach out to anyone who's doing the right, is on the right path when it comes to using Christianity or using any religion. Jewish Voices for Peace,
Yeah.
just for the good. These are our allies. We need to find those allies. The church was a huge ally in the civil rights movement, and it allowed
Right.
people to get up and literally preach what it is that we are all about. Inspiring, of course, MLK, all of that. So I think we
Yeah.
need to have a little more religion, if so to speak, in whatever. It doesn't have to be belief, but it needs to be an organization of thinking and of principles and of integrity, which is what religion gives you.
Yeah.
And as an atheist, I like I said, I envy that they get to hang out once a week with their neighbors, and that they get to find babysitters at church and all the things that are just
Yeah,
very convenient about organizing under a religion. And I think this is great what this cafe is doing. I'm seeing more of it in terms of, I'm obsessed with seeing or following people on Instagram who have left the church. And they are some of the boldest, some of the smartest, sharpest, and most passionate thinkers and voices right now, currently in America. And I think that, and they've left evangelicalism doesn't necessarily mean they've left Jesus, so to speak, or the
right.
essential teachings. So I think we got to find those bridges. And I understand your knee-jerk reaction, Brad. I get that as well,
Sure.
and distrust. But at this point, right now, we need all the allies we can get. So I think this is great.
When I keep like reflecting on what Caitlin was just telling us, which is that, this isn't like what it's like organizing in a red state with a conservative religious base is not like organizing in blue states. I fled the uber religious, super right wing environment that I was raised in to a place that was, I mean, really from there, I've only lived in cities that were blue and progressive. And so I think one of the problems the left has is that we tend to look at these things with derision, right? We look at people who go to church as sometimes being weak or brainwashed or whatever, because we have this like sort of contrary, position with religion because of the way religion's been wielded against us. But, Caitlin has to work with what she's got, right? Like the Nebraskans for Palestine have Nebraskans to work with. And I'm sure more of those people are going to find conduits through religion than, maybe the people of Denver. I don't know. Denver actually seems pretty religious, to be perfectly honest, at least historically, but that's not my conduit to action. And even though I am like, a Jewish, probably atheist, if I really wanted to peg myself, I've always really loved the character of Jesus, like as written, like the things he stands for, the symbolism that he invokes, the support of everyone against the powerful that punch down. He's an anti-capitalist. Like there's everything about his character as written that makes him a remarkable figure, and also it's so unbelievable to me that you could take that figure as written and turn him into the way he's being wielded by the
With an
Christian nationalists.
AR-15.
That's right. Yes, AR-15 Jesus with blonde
Yeah,
hair and ripped muscles. I'm just like, what?
it's
What
laughable.
reality are
It's
y'all in?
laughable. Yeah, yeah,
What
yeah.
reality, right? But there are Jews who are being called to action. There's a Jewish tenet. This is one of the things that I've always argued against Zionists and my own faith is that there's a Jewish tenet called Tikkun Olam, and it means respect and appreciation and love for all life. And there's no caveats or asterisks to that. There's no like all life except if you feel you're being attacked, or all life except for when you need to generate security. Um, it's all life in general, and I do not see Tikkun Olam being practiced enough by my own people. Right, they're losing the sense of what the religion is supposed to guide them towards. There's also a bunch of awful shit in all religions, right? But like these like core tenets that like Jesus stood for, or that like Tikkun Olam stands for, right? These ideas are always about love everybody, share everything, do all these things. Vince, you're about to go to a Seder meal, you said. One of the things you do in the Seder meal is you always leave a table setting open, right? And technically, that's the place for Elijah, whom was a transient person who was accepted into a Passover Seder, and thus it became an edict that for all Jews they should leave a spot open at their table for anybody who needs to come in and eat food, right? No questions asked. If somebody walks in your front door, you sit them down at the Seder table and you say, "You come eat with us." I've never seen that practiced, but it's always been a spot at the table, right? And there's something symbolic to that I feel like if people understood, they would realize they have to supply food to Palestine. They have to stand against forced famine and the restriction of aid, because it is quite literally against our religious edicts. It's against the moral code. It's against the Seder, right? Like there's so many different aspects of that like no religion could possibly support, with authenticity.
The piece is called In Nebraska, Faith Drives Direct Action. It's on Yellow Seat Magazine online. Everybody definitely go give it a read. Hit me on Blue Sky at Vinny Chant. Let me know your thoughts. Invite me to your Seder dinners, to your mosque, to your temple, to your church. I absolutely love seeing how people are organized, especially when they're organized for good. And I got a lot of love for whomever your God is, for sure, because I've got a lot of love for my gods. And I look forward to continuing to find the helpers in places that I don't necessarily anticipate to find them.
So, like everybody and everything in America, we have to pay the bills and keep the lights on. So, enjoy this ad. The pen is mightier than the sword. When a paltry 6 companies control almost all of our media, this phrase becomes independent media's battle cry. In a world where misinformation often masquerades as fact, and it's harder than ever to discern truth from falsehood, independent media like Yellow Scene magazine works to find the truth. Since 2001, Yellow Scene has upheld a strict division between advertising and editorial, ensuring our journalism remains free from outside influence. For over 24 years, 25 and 2025, it's a nice round number, they've equipped you, their readers, with the necessary knowledge to make informed decisions on topics like local elections, school policies, or community developments. Support and follow Yellow Scene today. Let's talk about hope, right? Like I feel like just hearing you talk about Nebraska, Vince, gives me hope. Hearing Caitlin talk about Nebraska gives me a little hope in a place that I would have probably written off completely. Again, I'm like this like liberal blue state guy. So, we tend to have a bit of a nose upturned opinion of some of these rural states, but there seems to be hope sprouting up all throughout. You see the No Kings protest map, and I saw my hometown in Texas on it, and I was like, what? They're throwing a protest there too, right? So there's these little sparkles of hope showing up, right? What are you finding? Like, what's giving you hope as you're out there traversing the nation through all of these places that most people literally just call flyover states?
Really, what's giving me hope right now is the human beings inside of everything. Like the human condition is cool because we can be challenged, we can be tried, we can be stomped on, but we're always going to push for a little bit of progress. And I'm meeting people who are so radically humble and so steadfast in their lane that they don't even recognize the ripples of impact they're having. I think about Iowa, where I was a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking to a retired Supreme Court justice who teaches at Drake University. He's only retired from the Supreme Court because they have age limits on their court. And here's an argument against age limits for all those who want to have a fight with me later on Blue Sky. It does force out some of the better voices too. This man was one of the better liberal left voices in the state of Iowa, and he was making sure that the Supreme Court was balanced, and he was forced out by this limit. But he didn't call that quits, and he didn't want to, and he wanted to make sure that his voice wouldn't be lost forever in that seat. So at Drake University, he partnered with one of his students, a young man named Ezekiel Quattlebaum, who's a black man from Denver, Colorado, to build a class called Race, Law, and Iowa History, which I started calling systemic racism in the Constitution. And that's essentially what it was he was teaching lawyers who were graduating largely from Iowa public schools where critical race theory is now banned. You can't teach Black history through a Black lens in the state of Iowa anymore by law. He's making sure to highlight the legal ways that segregation, that racism, and that redlining were worked into the law from a constitution that was formed on abolishing slavery all the way through to continuing to subjugate Black Americans. And he has these conversations in a classroom with kids young adults who might be hearing some of this context for history for the very first time in their lives. And one of the questions that I had for Ezekiel when I sat down to talk with him about this in Denver was like, is this doing anything? And he talked about students in class who had their eureka light bulb turn on moment. And one young white woman even mentioned, she's like, now I suddenly understand why safe spaces for Black voices are so important, and why it doesn't make sense for me to be allowed in every space, because my presence has all of this historical context that their community knows and understands because they're still teaching it, but my community has just completely erased from the conversation. And that's going to inform how she argues in court someday, or if she becomes a judge, how she decides trials. It's going to argue how she chooses juries if she becomes a criminal attorney, what cases she takes and why if she becomes a civil attorney. And that's going to create a generation of change out from it. And when I was talking to Justice Apple, the retired Supreme Court justice, in his office at Drake about this, he really seemed like you could see that he hoped that this would have impact, but he wasn't confident or sure that it would. And it wasn't even the goal. It was more, this is just shit that I think people should know. And if
Yeah.
they know it, it's pretty inevitable that it'll change their trajectory a little bit. And seeing human beings like that who have just found a way that doesn't even feel or look like resistance as we imagine it through a contemporary lens, um, resisting and really
Yeah.
spurring change from whatever small position of power or influence they have. That gives me hope because people really do want a better world. And while it can feel overwhelming and outside of our control, what we can control are how we interact with the people in our day to day, in our immediate orbit, and the conversations that we're having. It's one of the reasons that I'll never stop mentioning Palestine, no matter what room I'm in, because it might sound like a broken record to the choir or an annoying propagandist to people who are on the other side, but for one or two people in that room, they might go Google something new that night or find a new creator on TikTok and learn something new. And our willingness as a species to learn something new still is where most of my hope comes from.
You start to feel like if we can't talk about critical race theory, knowing that the first colonial settlements in the United States had slaves and used their labor to build up this entire country, um, it starts to just look like, hopeless. When you see companies rolling back their diversity, equity, inclusion plans and strategies, it starts to feel hopeless. It's good to remind ourselves that there are really smart people out there that are finding the ways to continue the work despite the categorization of it, right? Whether we call it DEI or CRT or affirmative action or whatever moniker we decide to name it, we just use we rebrand the work and the philosophy and the teachings to match what it needs to match to be able to still get it across. But like to know that there are potential federal judges or lawyers entering the workspace that at least from that university are going to know the historical, context of what they're going to like, what decisions they're going to make, how they're going to argue. That's actually exciting to me. I don't know. It's like a long-term strategy, obviously, but it's exciting to me to know that there are more people entering that space to fight the fight than we would potentially know from the media. That person's story is not often told, except for in Yellow Scene, I guess. But because that story is not told enough, it feels like these movements against these things just are. It's just the culture being crushed, right, by the behemoth fascists, and there's no counter pressure being applied to that crush, but there actually is, and it's like super subversive counter pressure, in a different way than you normally are subversive, right?
Yeah.
So
Christian,
that's
what's
hopeful.
giving you hope from watching all of this up north with your both your friends in the United States, but also new neighbors who are facing the very real threat of invasion? And it's not as if the president of the United States is not making threats to annex land and hasn't verbally ruled out military conquest with our upstairs neighbor in the sovereign nation of Canada. What's giving you hope up there?
I like how Vince couched
I
that
would,
in hopeless scenarios.
well, yeah, well, first of all,
Yeah.
come at us, bro. It's, it is, the United States has never won against an insurrection, ever. Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan got their asses whooped. You think that you're going to go to Canada where everyone looks like you, speaks your language, knows your humor, knows all the shows, knows probably more about you and your history than you know about yourself, and you think you're going to actually be able to keep that population down? Ain't going to happen. So that's not going to happen. My hope actually is the American people. And that is that they are feisty. They are spicy. That is in there, and this is, I've always had this in my head. Now, does this mean, am I hopeful that it's going to happen soon? I don't know. I do. My hope comes couched in um, a wariness that things are going to get worse and potentially much worse before they get better. But the thing that America is going through is necessary because whatever America was before, and this includes Israel, and this includes the whole concept of what the colonialist enterprise has been happening in the Middle East and all that, this has to be absolutely broken down and restructured and rethought about. Um, I have hope in the spiciness of Americans. They are here, but they are also quietly waiting on the sidelines, and they will become fighters when the time is there. And I think there's a lot more of them, a lot more of good Americans who have integrity and have kindness and do want better for not just themselves, but for everyone in their country and the world. And I think there's a lot of them out there that are just quiet right now. So that's my hope, but I'm not saying that it's just going to be all rosy for a little bit. And I
Yeah.
think the rough road that might be in store, and we're seeing this from outside. I've been I'm, like I said, I've lived in the United States longer than I've lived. I'm more American in many ways than I am now Canadian, although my Canadian heart, that little heart, right, has always been in there, and I've always felt like a little bit of an outsider. Uh, but I would say that we in Canada are worried. We are sad for Americans. We are just deep. My dad said it. He was just like, I'm just so sad for America. I'm just so sad for them that they have to go through this. It's like they're why, And I think a
Yeah.
lot of the world feels like that, and a lot of the world is rooting for America. We want America to get through this. We want America to be better because we don't want to imagine an America in its current trajectory continuing on this way, because that's not a world we all want to live in.
I
So,
saw an ad recently. I'm gonna probably misattribute it to Canadian Air, but I think it was a Canadian Air ad, and it features a man checking in for a flight. I think all I remember is the outcome of this interaction, but the woman asks where he's flying from or home to, and he says the U.S. She comes back around from the desk and gives him a huge hug. You know what I mean? Like it was just like an
yeah,
embrace, and the man just kind of like, oh, thank you.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah, and
that's
that
how I
is
like to think of
really
Canada.
that is it is. Now, listen, we're up for a scrap, but we all right.
I saw it in your eyes. You had that fire ignited, the deep Canadian within you.
I grew up playing ice hockey, and I can confirm that you Canucks do know how to scrap for sure. And thank you for the yeah. Please hug United States again today. We certainly do need it.
Did you just say United Statesian?
Well, yeah, because we're all everybody at this table is American, right? So we're
That's
United
right.
States.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Love that.
yeah.
And each week we wrap up here with our highs and lows from you, the hosts, and the guests. So this week that gets to be me. And so let's go around the table real quick. We're going to identify either a high or a low from our week. We're not focused on doom and gloom, nor on useless optimism, but we are going to focus on some good, some bad in this world and through a realistic lens each and every week. So what
Yeah.
are our highs or lows?
I can start. I had both in the last week. And so my high was reminding myself that meditation works immensely at helping bring calm and balance in my body. Something I hadn't done for years. My therapist is like, "You're not meditating?" And I'm like, "No, I don't know why. I've got a 4-year-old and it's just like hard to find the time." And I'm like, "Of course I can find the time." So I started meditating at the beginning of last week, and it had a profound effect on my mood and on my ability to engage happily in my life, both with my family, but also in doing my work. I just was more productive from it. So, like, self care is community care, y'all. Definitely take care of yourself, take care of your mind. It's impossible to keep it quiet in these moments. My low came right before that point, which was, I'm letting grief and outrage and the constant flow of information from the world cloud my mind, cloud my heart, and keep me from being present with my family, keep me from feeling my own happiness, even feeling like myself in any way. So I think both of those are pretty well related. to my mental health struggles that we may all be going through, but definitely don't disregard meditation. Very useful.
Yeah, I would say mine works off of that as well. I'll start my low is becoming my high, and that is that my daughter basically said, "Dad, why don't you play with me enough? Why you're always busy, you're always working, you're always," and right? And so that was a sleepless dark night for me.
Yeah.
To And then to come out of that and go, I need to be more present. I mean, with everything in the world, you take on the world. We all take on the world, right? And I'm sure there's many people out there listening right now who we're seeing it all in 4K, everything that's wrong. But what is right in front of us, we need to take care of that, because that's where the real change starts. And so, yeah, my high, my low. Mm-hmm.
I remember talking to Vince about
Love
this
that.
once, and they said, you can't set yourself on fire to keep your neighbors warm. And it's such a good reminder that I constantly come back to.
Mm-hmm.
That's my high for the week. I'm coming up on 1 month on August 4th. Will be the official 1 month of me publishing and publicly talking about these American Crossroads. It started with an article about celebrating 4th of July in Trump County, Colorado. And then since then, I have published pieces from Nebraska, Iowa, more from Colorado, including a piece with a Palantir AI whistleblower. And I'm headed out to Kansas to get one more out before the official 1 month happens. But we've also launched this important podcast that we've been talking about between us for months now, and it feels really good to have this landing. And just in the face of all odds, and no matter how hard it is to know that people are reading and seeing and having conversations about the radically dope people that I'm fortunate enough to know and fortunate enough to meet while I'm driving across the country has certainly been a high. And I want to do a little shout out for my new glasses. A friend noticed that I was rocking the Hanson Brothers taped look for the last few months since February. And she was like, you can't be doing this project looking like that. And every penny that I have personally is going into my gas tank right now to get me to the next story. And I was like, these taped ones work. They cause headaches, they cause double vision, but they get me between places. And she just got my prescription and ordered me a new pair because it's going to take community taking care of community while we do this. And so I'm grateful for the support that I've seen for this project that I've dreamed about doing for a long time. And it feels really good to see it actually it exists. It's real. It's
The
no
little
longer
things
just
that give me hope. The last time I saw
Yeah.
Vince, his glasses were melting off of his face. Like the tape was no longer adhesive. And yeah, I'm so glad you got your new pair.
These 100-degree days really do just melt right through everything. It's wild.
Also, there's an upcoming event for Yellow Scene. It's the Yellow Scene Gala. So Yellow Scene Magazine's 2025 Carnival Gala fundraiser is to support independent local journalism. Proceeds will help support Yellow Scene, with the vast majority of proceeds going to staff, operations, and KGNU's longstanding award-winning journalism. All contributions are tax deductible, of course. And if you want to attend that, it is October 16th, 2025 from 5 to 9 p.m. at the Louisville Underground. And, as always, make sure that you share, subscribe, like, follow, and continue the conversation and contribute at yellowscene.com. Christian and I aren't experts in any of this. We don't profess to know what the right way is, nor can we tell you how to do things the right way. We're going to rely on people like Vince, on creators and journalists to highlight different ways that people can help. But we also need to rely on you too. So, if you heard the conversation today, if you heard our interview with Caitlin, and you have other avenues to help, whether that's the famine in Gaza or just raising awareness to fight back in your state, please let us know in the comments. Reach out to us, and we'd be happy to focus on those stories, those ideas, or even highlight those guests in the future. So for Find the Helpers Pod, I'm Brad.
And I'm Christian Campbell.
Yes, and we'll see you next week.
Find the Helpers Pod is a production for Yellow Scene Magazine. Our executive producer is Vince Chandler. Our hosts are Christian Campbell and Brad Bogus. And our music is by Mark Wilson X. Don't forget to share this episode.